Team T.R.E.C includes Ciara Durnien, Jessica Heinrich, Nathan Stones, Kevin Truong, and Christine Chang. And together, they tackle the challenge area of decarbonisation of transportation. Christine, the virtual stage is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're Team Say No to Carbs. Our challenge was to tackle the question of how might we accelerate the transition of decarbonised energy for intermodal transport hubs. And when we interviewed the relevant stakeholders, we found that everyone wants to decarbonise, but the problem is there just isn't enough incentive or funding for companies to put money and resources into a solution. So our solution to this problem was to create transport renewable energy certificates, which will be based on a really similar model to the existing renewable energy certificates. We think that this is a really groundbreaking concept, and we've seen it work in another industry, and there's great potential here for the transport industry. So thank you for the opportunity to present to you, and we hope you enjoy our pitch.
Our world has been in a state of emergency. Our carbon footprint has been heavy.
Every year, the global freight industry consumes 300 million tonnes of fuel. 30% of global transport CO2 emissions come from road freight in particular. There is a growing demand to decarbonise, but the transition can be challenging. The freight industry now finds itself in a revolutionary space with the opportunity to be a leader by transitioning to zero emissions.
We will create an online platform that functions as a market, producing transport renewable energy certificates that act as a currency for successfully reducing carbon emissions and can be purchased and traded between companies.
We believe by finding synergy in the sustainability goals of policymakers, freight providers, retailers and consumers, and by creating a market incentive and competitive tension, we can accelerate the decarbonisation of transport in the freight industry.
By uniting all key stakeholders on one platform, there will be recognition and reward for reducing carbon emissions, therefore accelerating the industry's transition and enabling positive change.
This solution requires various skill sets. As a multidisciplinary team, we can approach this problem from every angle, integrating insights from industry experts and key stakeholders.
We have a multi-year plan which involves developing the certificates to create an incentive and prototyping the online platform with feedback from the industry, then scaling the platform to a point where the certificates can be traded, similar to shares on a share market.
To do this, we need your support and funding to develop the platform and initiate the rollout across the industry. Let's work together to decarbonise the freight industry and tread a little lighter.
Wow, amazing. Thank you, Christine and Team T.R.E.C. Simone, love to hear your thoughts on this.
Thank you, team. That's such an interesting idea. And, working for an airport, transport emissions are very, very close to my heart and at the forefront of my thinking all the time. So this is a particularly interesting one for me. I'd really like to know a little bit more about how did you get to choose this solution? What was the process that you went through and why this solution?
Yes, so that's a really great question. So when we first got posed the question of how to decarbonise intermodal transport hubs, we started out by speaking to different stakeholders. And when we did that, and we watched a few different interviews from people like the CEO of Woolies and logistics companies, it was really clear that everyone is on the same page and they're all aware that we need to decarbonise, but there's just no financial incentive right now, because at the end of the day, the company's first and foremost focus is on profit and making a margin and delivering quickly for their customers. But increasingly, we are also seeing more of a demand from everyday consumers for large corporations to decarbonise, and they're the key clients of our logistics companies. So we're starting to see a bit of a convergence of the stakeholders' interests. So the consumers are driving the change, but it's the retailers who will really force it back through the supply chain. And sorry, at this point, I'll just pass it to Jess to talk a little bit more about the solution and how we got there.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Christine. Obviously that gave us an understanding of the serious demand for decarbonisation in the industry, but it also showed that there's such an opportunity for everyone to play a part. So when we started to look closer at the freight industry specifically, we found that we couldn't focus solely on the decarbonisation of intermodal hubs, as the majority of carbon emissions come from the actual road freight. And so as we were discussing our solution, we came to the conclusion that by developing a solution that targeted road freight, united all of the key stakeholders, and enabled the supply chain to meet these consumer and retailer demands to become carbon neutral, was the most commercially viable solution for the freight industry to accelerate their transition to decarbonisation without driving to the bottom and collapsing the industry.
That's great. I'm really glad that you started with the stakeholders. That's such an important part of the process. Alan and Peter, I'd like to invite you to ask a question if you have one.
Peter, do you want to ask something? Otherwise, I will. I'm just not sure what drives the participation. I think, by the way, I think it's a great idea and I haven't heard it from anybody, and it could truly be developed into something. With the renewable energy target, it was driven by a mandate on the industry that the retailers had to buy and retire a certain percentage of their electricity delivered at an increasing percentage every year, and it was compulsory. How do you get people to actively participate in a voluntary scheme? Because there'll be buyers and sellers, there's got to be some profit to be made or compulsion.
That's a really great question, and definitely backing from the government and having something like a renewable energy target is something that I think is very crucial to get the solution off the ground. To talk a little bit more about the next steps in the rollout and what might be involved in that, I'll defer it to Ciara.
Sure, Christine, thank you. So Alan, I suppose the next step for us really would be to get the initial funding to conduct a feasibility study and collate, I suppose, inputs from various stakeholders across the intermodal and freight industry. Our challenge champion, John Eccles, has actually already been in touch with some folk from ARENA, and they have already indicated that this is something that they would be very interested in getting a pitch on. So that's actually rather exciting for us. So our next step would be securing some funding there to get the feasibility study started. I suppose we want our solution to work in a very similar fashion to the REC system. So those who are online and haven't really heard what REC means, it actually stands for Renewable Energy Certificate. So this would really drive this on. We would need support from the government and the clean energy regulator. At the conceptual level at the moment, we thought that we would have targets like the renewable energy target. So that would go a long way in providing that, I suppose, additional incentive for the industry. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and well done for the interest from ARENA. That's excellent.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
It's a very quick question. I'm impressed with the depth of, you've done some stakeholder consultation. I suppose leading on from Alan's question, what was the response to the people that you did talk with and engage around the concept from the industry end user point of view? Did you get some feedback on that?
Hi, so when we spoke to the different stakeholders, we were actually talking to them more about what sort of solutions they currently have for decarbonisation and what be helpful in helping them decarbonise. We haven't had the opportunity to test this particular solution with the stakeholders yet, but that would be the next step in our study, and it would be really interesting to get some more industry feedback and then incorporate the feedback into our solution.
Great. Thank you. They're excellent answers.
Thank you so much, Team T.R.E.C, for the amazing presentation, and thanks again to the judges.
The winner is T.R.E.C, the transportation, the decarbonisation of transport.
Thank you. That's really great news. It's very unexpected. We were talking on a group chat while we were watching the presentation, and we had so many great solutions from everyone.
So, T.R.E.C team, a few things, and this is me sharing with you the collective impression of my fellow judges and myself. Several things. First of all, we really felt that you reached out to the stakeholder group well and articulated back to us what you learned from them. You're also addressing just a huge sector. After electricity, the transport sector is now becoming the second largest emitter across the economy. So transport is huge and needs to be dealt with somehow. We also thought it was a clever application or transference of thinking that's being used in other sectors and not being, to the best of my knowledge, thought of in relation to the transportation sector. In fact, I've never heard of it anywhere in the world. If it works, it could be a world first, which is great. And you obviously were able to capture the interests of the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, at least to the level that they were willing to talk to you. And that shows a sign of a lot of promise. So congratulations from my fellow judges, Simone and Peta and myself.
Brilliant. A huge, massive congratulations to Team T.R.E.C, who are the Judges' Choice winner for this year's Future Energy Showcase.